Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Kerry. I'm going to introduce Walt Babbit here, who I've actually known quite a while, and I heard about it's been going on for a long time, and it's still going on, these Tuesday evening lobby concerts at Lawrence Arts Center, where a lot of people play, many that you may have heard of and some you haven't. And I got the schedule, and they had a photo, and I thought, wow, man of many talents, who knew? So Walt does a country music traditional program and then gives us a little context about the people whose songs he's singing, which I just love, especially since a lot of these people are from Texas, and that's where my roots are. So anyway, here's Walt.
Thank you, everybody. I started this program as just a country music presentation. You know, it's all about the music. I love the old country music artists, and I call my program "The Roots of Country Music." And I had a band. I mean, I still sort of have a band, but they wouldn't come today. And so I gave this program, and to give people a little background on the old artists, most people don't know about them, I gave little anecdotes or little stories, and it turned out that people liked the stories as much as they did the music. And so it developed as much into just a program about the history of the old artists as much as it did about the music. And so today, it's usually a 2 to 2.5 hour program, and today it'd be much shorter. And so that means we just won't go as late. We'll start in the same place in the late 20s, but only go up into the early 50s. And won't discuss as many, I won't play or sing, and won't talk about as many of the artists. So I'll start with just a little bit of, this is really the history of country music, meaning country music, commercialized country music, as we know it. Of course, music was being played all across the country. The roots of country music is really from the South, and a lot of it comes from the mountains of Appalachia and the Smokies, from the roots of the people who settled there, mostly Irish, Scottish, English settlers, and their primary instrument was the fiddle. And it wasn't too long after that they found the banjo. The banjo had been introduced by African slaves, but it really suited the fiddle to make barn dance music. And so most of the music from there was old folk songs and these old instrumental songs. Some of them made up, some of them were old traditional songs. And then the guitar came along and was kind of backed for a rhythm and for a backup, and that really supported the singing more. So a big core of the country music history is this Appalachian old mountain music, fiddle, banjo, and guitar, and the folk songs. Now, it's also, influenced by what they call Western music, which is, the music of the cowboys, which wasn't real widespread and pretty narrow, but became really incorporated into the country music scene. And also, there was some Spanish or Mexican music influence into Western swing and that kind of music. And then religious music, church, old hymns, old church music was all a part of this. So the biggest, in the beginning, the biggest group of players or people who were performing were called string bands. And so it was a fiddle, banjo, guitar, just people playing around, and they found out they could play on the radio for free, and so they'd leave home and they'd go and play. And there was a lot of them, and they had really great names. The Skillet Lickers, the Dixie Clodhoppers, the Fruit Jar Drinkers, the Possum Hunters, the Hillbillies, and they called themselves Hillbillies, but then they named, this certain group named their band the Hillbillies, and so hillbilly music became a big part of country music, the beginning of country music. And the Dixie Mountaineers, one of the first recorded string bands. So radio was a huge part, probably the main influence of the beginning of the popularization of country music, because they broadcast all over the country, and even the people back in the hills could get it, and often there'd just be one family that had a radio, and everybody would come there and listen. In the beginning, radio was just classical, opera, classical music, but they had some dead time, and some programmers talked them into letting some country people play, string bands, and they got such a response from the audience, cards and letters, that they thought, oh, there's money to be made here. And so they let these people come play for free, but then they sold advertising along with them. And the bands and the people playing were glad to do it because it gave them exposure, and then they'd go out on personal tours. It is the mid-20s when they started the country program, and in the early 30s, they started actual programs on the radios called the barn dances. All the big radio stations, WLS in Chicago, WLM in Cincinnati, WSB Atlanta, and WSM from Nashville, they were cranking up their broadcast volume and putting on these, in the evenings, putting on these, what they called barn dances, which was a program of country music, singers, string bands. And they all had different names. Louisiana Hayride, which was down in Shreveport, the Boone County Jamboree, the Saddle Mountain Roundup, and of course the Grand Ole Opry, the only one still going, still going, and that was from WSM in Nashville. And that, like I said, that started out as a radio show. And people started showing up at the radio station to try to get a glimpse of the players and looking in the windows. And so first they made space in the station, but then there was too many people, so they had to move it, and eventually ended up in the Ryman Auditorium. So radio was the main influence for country programming and the popularization of country music in the beginning. But almost simultaneous with that was the making of records. They were learning to make records. And there had been people like Alan Lomax and his son had been combing the hills for folk songs and recording them on old waxes. But some people were beginning to realize the popularity of country music and this old-time music, mountain music, and realized there's money to be made here. And the primary man who's responsible for the starting of this, his name is Ralph Peer. He worked for Victor Recording, and he started going into different towns, different setups, and he'd set up a recording studio in a warehouse or anywhere he could get. These were wax cylinders, couldn't be copied over. And then he'd post advertisements before he came to town, and then people would pour into town, and he'd try to choose who he was going to audition and who he's going to record. And so he traveled all around the country doing this, and he would take the rights to these songs and to these recordings, and he'd pay them $50 or $75 for a recording session, and then make records. And then they started selling records. So because of this recording and because of the radio, people, you know, the general population started to become more and more aware and started wanting to hear certain groups and certain artists. Well, there was a watershed moment in Bristol, Tennessee, when Ralph Peer set up a recording studio, and on the same weekend, two of the most enduring and popular acts in all country music came to town and made recordings that day. The first one was the Carter family. The Carter family was from Clinch Mountain, Virginia. There's three people: A.P. Carter and his wife Sarah, and then Maybelle Carter, who was Sarah's cousin, and also her sister-in-law. And Sarah sang alto, played the auto harp. Maybelle was a virtuoso guitarist, really just unheard of for a woman, but she was. And AP was the promoter, and he kind of sang in, they called it basing in. He kind of walked in, bass in. And so they came and recorded, and Ralph Peer was completely taken with them. And so he recorded them, got their records, and got them sent out. And the first two songs that they recorded were Single Girl, Married Girl, and Bury Me Beneath the Willow. And that's the first song I'll sing. My heart is sad and I'm lonely for the only one I love. When shall I see her? Oh, no, never till we meet in heaven above. Oh, bury me beneath the willow under the weeping willow tree, so she will know where I'm sleeping, and perhaps she'll weep for me. Tomorrow was our wedding day, oh God, where can she be? She's out a-courting with another and no longer cares for me. Oh, bury me beneath the willow under the weeping willow tree, so she will know where I'm sleeping, and perhaps she'll weep for me. She told me that she dearly loved me. How could I believe her untrue? Until the angel softly whispered, she will prove untrue to you. Oh, bury me beneath the willow under the weeping willow tree, so she will know where I'm sleeping, and perhaps she'll weep for me. she'll weep for me. Thank you. Now, the Carter family didn't really write any of their own songs. They just cabbaged onto every song they could find out there in the mountains. And AP traveled extensively all through the mountains of their neighborhood, but also hundreds of miles around, gathering songs, the old songs, and he might arrange them or change them slightly, and he put his name on them, or their name on them, the Carter family. And because they were just like in the public domain, he got away with that, and so he's got credit for like hundreds of these old songs, and got paid for them too. And so as they became popular, they needed more and more songs, and so he had to travel farther and farther and took people with him to help collect these songs. Excuse me. The Carter family was, they were basically shy. I mean, they performed, but they didn't tour. They went around, they played in churches, in schools. They didn't go too far from home, really. They had to go home and work their farms. And so they didn't become big stars. They were wildly popular, but people didn't know much about them, really. But a lot of their appeal and popularity came from the fact that people saw them as just regular people, like they were, sitting on the porch, sitting at home, making music. And so, of course, a lot of that music was old gospel songs, old church music. I'll do one for you now called Diamonds in the Rough. While walking out one evening, not knowing where to go, heard a little mission band just as we closed our show. I heard that little mission band playing with all their might. I gave my heart to Jesus and left the show that night. The day will soon be over and evening will be gone. No more gems to be gathered, so let us all press on. When Jesus comes to claim us and says it is enough, the diamond will be shining, no longer in the rough. One day, my precious comrade, you too were lost in sin. Someone sought your rescue, and someone took you in. And Jesus, when he found you very rough. And you were precious diamond, no longer in the rough. The day will soon be over and evening will be gone. No more gems to be gathered, so let us all press on. When Jesus comes to claim us and says it is enough, the diamond will be shining, no longer in the rough. while reading through the Bible, some wondrous sights I see. I see of Peter, James, and John by the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus, when he found them very rough. But they were precious diamonds, no longer in the rough. The day will soon be over and evening will be gone. No more gems to be gathered, so let us all press on. And Jesus, when he found us very rough. But we were precious diamonds, no longer in the rough. Thank you. So, like I said, the Carter family was really popular, but people couldn't really get to see them. They only played small venues, and there weren't any radio stations close, but they were selling thousands and thousands of records. And of course, people wanted to know about them, who they were and what their story was, and there really wasn't any way to find out. But record sales fell off a little bit, and the economy slowed down, and so AP talked Sarah and Maybelle into moving to McAllen, Texas, right across the border from Mexico, where a man had set up a gigantic radio transmitter in Mexico, where he wasn't restricted by the United States. So this man's a famous Kansan, Dr. John Brinkley, the goat gland doctor. And they ran him out of Kansas. They ran him out of a couple other states too. And so he just said, "Okay, I'll move to Mexico." And he was still carrying on his surgical business, but he built this gigantic radio transmitter that overwhelmed every transmitter from hundreds of miles around, and there was all kinds of stories like